What's up, guys? Who needs Medi here, coming at you with another retro deck profile. Today we're going to look at Deon Akridge's second place 2014 Nationals hat deck. This was for April 2014, so it was very notoriously known as hat format. The finals was a hat mirror match between Deon and Corey McDuffie, but Lightsworn Rulers, Mythic Rulers, Geargia, Fire Fist / Fat, they were all pretty decent decks at the time. I took Medolce to this Nationals and spend most of my time buying foreign cards from all the vendors. So you can tell where my priorities were in terms of doing well at the event. So we'll get right into the list. This is one of my favorite formats to play, and I do really enjoy this deck, and this is probably my favorite list of the April 2014 format. So started off, we have the 3 Myrmeleo. This is your main searcher. It searches a whole trap card, mostly search Bottomless, but we do have Trap Hole Nightmare as well. And then when it's special summoned, it gets to pop a set card, so or a spell and trap card. So we get to summon it out with our 2 Dionaeas. You obviously don't want to open this guy, or she can kind of brick early on in the game. But it is really important. It's the wolf bark of the deck. It lets you, bring back Myrmeleo and continue your plays. You can't bring out another copy of Dionaea. So for the next engine in the deck, we have the hands. We have our 3 fire hand and our 3 ice hand. Fire hand pops a monster when it is destroyed, and summons ice hand. Ice hand pops a spell and trap. Ice hand love to eat all of those tankies, Boojins if it was playing Kaiser Coliseum. Ice hand could go after that. And it was a water for Dweller, so it made Dweller 2200 if you decided to overlay with it. So it's kind of an interesting engine. He also played only 2 Moralltach. He didn't play Beagletalk or Ignition or anything like that, just the Sanctums. You don't want to draw it, so he's only playing 2, but it's level 5, so you can make Pleiades with it if you get both of them on the board. There are ways to get both of them out there at the same time, and the effect does not target when it destroys a card, so that is also another really cool interaction. And then the last 3 monsters, he played 1 Cardcar D. Essentially, it's like a 4th Myrmeleo where you can go +1 when you normal summon it. So that's kind of the whole shtick of Cardcar D, because you can't play 4 Myrmeleos. And then 2 Maxxes. This is really good against dragons and things like that when they go for their biggest soul charge play. Sylvans, especially when they go for their soul charge play. This is kind of a way to, stun that. This deck has a really hard time with getting over big established boards. Going second and seeing your opponent have like a big soul charge and having no out to it is pretty difficult for this deck to kind of overcome. So that's probably the biggest weakness. This deck really does not like Felgrand or Stardust. He didn't play a lot of spells. He only played 3 Pot of Duality. This is at the height of the Upstart Hoban thing, and he said he didn't want to play Upstarts because he didn't want to draw Moralltach, which obviously makes sense. I'm a big fan of Duality over Upstart, and giving your opponent 1,000 life in a deck that takes a really long time to grind them out. Typically, games do last a little bit longer, kind of like the Hat Mirror is very similar to the Goat Mirror, where it's a very, trade advantage off and kind of go back and forth. So I can kind of understand. You don't special summon too often in this deck, so Pot of Duality makes a lot of sense with the Upstart. And he didn't play Dichotomy because you have to skip your battle phase. You don't want to do that. Yeah, going +1 is nice, but you have to take advantage of when you can get damage in, when you can get damage in. And the last 3 spells are just 1 Dark Hole, clear the field, things like that. And then just 2 MSTs, because a lot of the decks didn't play traps, so you don't want to have a bunch of dead cards against decks that don't play traps. He decided not to main deck Wiretap. He side decked it. I will show the sideboard later on in the video when we were done through the main deck. So that's it for the spells, and now we're on to the whole giant load of trap cards. For starters, we have the 3 Artifact Sanctum. This is the it's just probably the best trap in the whole deck. The fact that you could just get your Moralltach from your deck, pop a card. If they blind, this is why they just didn't blind space and why Wiretap was more common. But if they blind space this card, you're just going to go so plus. It's insane. I believe Deon lost because he blind spaced and hit a Sanctum in the finals. And I think there were only 2 cards set, if I remember. It's been a while since I've watched that game. But he had a 50-50 shot, and he hit the Sanctum. And it didn't go great for him. For our Myrmeleo targets, we do have 1 Bottomless, because it was limited to 1. And then we have the 2 Trap Hole Nightmares. It was interesting to see people like normal summon Arsenal, and then get armor, and then not like flip the armor, or they would summon like an Arsenal and then Accelerator and then summon Gear X and then not activate the effect to play around this card, to just be like afraid of this card and essentially make it dead. So even if it was just sitting there and you didn't flip it, it was doing its job of making your opponent wait to go plus and try and gain that advantage. You were just, and then it gives you an extra turn to deal with their Gear X, whether you just like summon like a Fire Hand or something. 2, Call of the Haunted. This is really cool because you could get Dionaea has that effect where it could set another card, one of your whole cards, and then Myrmeleo has the pop effect, and then you have your artifact monsters, so you can do things like that. So, and like I said, this is your kind of your way to make Pleiades if you're able to do so. 1 Compulse. This deck hates Stardust, and 1 Deprison. This deck hates Stardust. This is kind of your 2 Aus Compulses at 1, so we do the Deprison to essentially kind of be like a second pseudo Compulse almost. But this card is also really good if they're trying to like ram a Fire Hand or an Ice Hand or something like that into you, and then try and go plus off of their hands if they need to deal with a board presence that you have, and you can just Deprison them and then set them back, and that can be really costly. 2 Blackhorn. This card was really popular at the beginning of the format, but kind of fell out of sorts, so it was really cool to see him play it, because he said essentially he played it because no one thought he was going to play it, or no one thought people would play it. It was typically finding its spot in the sideboard. But if you're like if they couldn't turn 1 Felgrand you, which was like is fairly easy for maybe Lightsworn Rulers, they had a soul charge, but Mythic Rulers it was a little bit more difficult unless they had the Water Dragon combo. So if you went second against that deck, but essentially you just really need to get rid of like Felgrands and Stardusts and things that really hurt you, and Spark Dragon, things of that nature. 1 Torrential Tribute and 1 Needle Sealing. This is really cool. This card is actually pretty good against Geargia, despite it only destroying face-ups. But when they try and go off with their Gear X's and things like that and just try and extend, and they feel safe because they're not being TT'd, Needle Sealing can really just like catch people out of surprise, especially because you can just like flip it in the battle phase. We have some effect negation as well. We got 2 Fiendish Chains and 1 Breakthrough Skill. Breakthrough Skill is really cool because you can banish it during your turn and then Fire Hand and then kill Stardust that way. So that's a really good way to get rid of cards that you just need to turn off and things of that nature. And then the last trap is 1 Solemn Warning. We do have a very, very, very large trap lineup because this is a half back row format, half aggro format. It was kind of all or nothing. There were very few decks that would play like 7 or 8 traps. It was either like 2 or like 2 Emptiness and then a bunch of combo cards, or like 15 traps like Geargia would play like 15 to 18 trap cards. For the extra deck, we have 1 Exciton. This is kind of like your blowout card. This deck actually had a semi-difficult time resolving this effect because you were usually up in advantage because of all the pluses that you were able to generate. So this was just a comeback card if you really needed it. If you like needed to like summon a monster like a Fire Hand and then Call of the Haunted, another level 4 back, and then try and Exciton the board. 2 101, because like I said, you have a very difficult time getting over bigger monsters. So 2 101 to make sure that we can always, suck up that Stardust or something like that. 1 Dweller. This card really kills hands. Mermails weren't really that big this format because Gund had been put to 1, so there was very rarely would you see Water. Water was much better in January when we had 3 Gund, but Dweller's really good for the hands. Cowboy, because we can't do a lot of damage, so that way we can make sure we can finish off that last 800. 1 Direwolf, pop cards. He actually played 1 Utopia. There's not a lot of people playing this card. This card is really good in time, and it is really good because it is a beat stick in a deck that doesn't play a ton of beat sticks. So the only reason the negate effect is the only reason you would play this over something like Pearl, which is 26 and can beat over Stardust and Spark Dragon and all the other 2,500 beaters in the format. 1 Roach to deal with Judgment Dragon for Lightsworn Rulers. This card's really good in that regard. Emerald to keep cycling back our hands if we want to keep that cycle going, kind of like we would with Pot of Avarice and Tengu back in the day. Cairngorgon, he actually said he lost pretty much every game he summoned this card, so this card will get really good in Duelist Alliance format. We found that it was fairly solid later on. 1 Blackship, because you can just send hands and burn and not have to worry about them being destroyed and things like that. 1 Ragnazero, this card is really good against decks that play tanky because they're always buffed, and it's also really good against Arsenal because Arsenal buffs itself from 15 to 17 or however big it gets. Rhapsody, this card is awesome against Lightsworn rulers and mythic rulers and things like that, where you can just banish their dragons and then they can't play. Heartlandraco, this card is pretty interesting. You don't really see it that often, but the ability to attack directly is kind of funny. And then the aforementioned one of Pleiades for that very rare instance of having 2 Moralltach. And now we'll get on to the sideboard. He only side decked 2 monsters. The one of the 3rd Maxx to finish out especially going second against dragons and things like that, where you need to make sure, especially Sylvans, things like that, to make sure you have enough cards to come back. And then Lava Golem, this card is really good against Stardust and Felgrand, or just anything that puts up 2 or 3 monsters where they can't be targeted or destroyed or anything like that. It's the kaiju of its time period, essentially. So if you're familiar with a little bit more current Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's kind of like giving him a Gamma Seal. 2 Soul Release. This card is awesome against Dragon Rulers because you can just, banish all their dragons or anything to let them play and then just get rid of all of it. And it actually gets rid of, if they play like Breakthrough Skill, they very rarely would that deck do it, but you can banish that too because it's 5 cards. 2 Noblemen against Girgia. Again, this is another reason why they would put armor face up and then not flip it, because they're afraid of knock on their turn, so they would flip it on their turn and then flip summon it, and that was kind of how they were playing around knock. And the last spell is the 3rd MST on the traps. You have 2 Wiretap. This card is really good against Sanctum in the mirror because you don't want to destroy it, because that will obviously trigger it, so you can't warning it, you Wiretap it. 2 Deep Dark, this card was awesome against Soul Charge plays and things like that, and it was searchable, so the fact that you can have it searchable out to those big Sylvan plays, those big Ruler plays, those big Lightsworn plays, you want to make sure you can out them. Another Needle Singing, again for the same reason, against like Girgia and things like that. Another D-Prison for the same reason as the previous one, obviously, and then the last card is 2 Memory of an Adversary. I really like that he played this. This card is really good against the Hat Mirror. The Hat Mirror is fairly difficult to side for because you can't do something like Yozen Match or anything like that if you're like a Lightsworn player, things of that nature. So there's a lot of like weird things that you can't really do for the mirror. So Memory of an Adversary is really cool. It kind of reminds me of when Agent players would side Leeching the Light for the mirror as opposed to Light Imprisoning because they couldn't side that card. So it's fairly interesting. There'll be some duels and such in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe for more retro format content, and thanks for watching, guys.